It started with an equation. Just a string of symbols. Ink on faded paper. But something about it didn't add up. Or rather, it added up too perfectly. In 1979, NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory received a quiet internal briefing. It wasn't televised, it wasn't published, and it was never archived in any official way. The subject? A fringe mathematical model, freshly submitted from a contracted physicist at Caltech, claiming to have mapped out the boundary conditions for interdimensional membrane collision. You weren't supposed to hear those words. No one was. The theory proposed a possibility that, under certain gravitational tensions, our universe could brush against another, like two soap bubbles drifting in a cosmic sink. At the point of contact, laws of physics might blur, time might fold, events could rewrite. Sound familiar? If you're thinking, that sounds like how the multiverse works in Marvel or DC Comics. You're not alone, because someone at NASA thought the same thing, and flagged the file for internal review. Then it vanished. Not slowly, not lost to time, erased, scrubbed from project directories, unlisted from digital databases. Even the physicist who submitted it, Dr. Elliot Voss, reportedly disappeared months later during a hiking trip in the Angeles National Forest. But here's the kicker. A partial scan of the file resurfaced 33 years later. Posted anonymously on a darknet physics forum under the title, E9 Collision Equation, Voss Variant. The math was dense, unreadable to most, but someone translated the core idea. If one Brin universe has a matching energetic signature to another, then under quantum overlap, individuals may appear to shift or flicker across timelines undetectably. Think about that. It wasn't about traveling between universes. It was about existing in multiple realities simultaneously. What happens if you remember things that never happened? Why do millions insist that Mandela died in prison? That Pikachu had a black-tipped tail? That they vividly recall a different ending to a movie? Maybe they're not wrong. Maybe they're just tuned to another Brin. See, Voss's paper didn't name fictional universes, but his math did reference phenomena that eerily match comic book tropes. Residual timeline resonance, echo identity, cross-universe contamination. Doesn't that sound like The Flash? Or Scarlet Witch? Or any number of comic characters who, remember, lives they never lived? Here's where it gets darker. According to a FOIA request submitted in 2017, NASA's internal logs list a redacted session in 1981 labeled, Non-Causal Entanglement Simulation, Voss Artifact. The term, artifact, was unusual, usually reserved for physical anomalies, like space debris or AI glitches. So, was there an object? Did they test something? A whistleblower claiming to be part of the Data Integrity Division at NASA later posted anonymously on a now-banned subreddit. He said this: "There was a room we weren't allowed to enter without EEG scans. Not just security clearance, actual brainwave pattern verification. Inside was a screen running a continuous simulation of the Voss equation. Except, sometimes, the screen would show yourself. Not in real time. In other scenarios. Places you've never been. Wearing clothes you never owned. Most thought he was lying. A-L-A-R per. Until someone cross-checked a still frame he leaked from that simulation. In the reflection on the glass, the man standing at the terminal had no face. Just a smudge. Like reality couldn't render him. Like the program couldn't decide which version of him to show. And this brings us to a name most people forget. Project Chrysalis. Not Marvel. Not DC. NASA. Project Chrysalis was a short-lived experimental division meant to analyze subconscious pattern recognition under stress in astronauts. Publicly, it was about dream journaling. Privately, they were trying to detect dimensional bleed. In simple terms, flashes of other lives breaking through. The kind of thing that might make a man wake up with bruises he can't explain. Or a memory of a family that doesn't exist. One astronaut, who later turned recluse and refused all interviews, scribbled the same word over and over in a sealed notebook recovered from his locker. Echo self, echo self, echo self. So what was NASA really testing? What if the multiverse isn't just possible, but already bleeding through? And what if the only way to keep the illusion intact was to bury the science in fiction? Hide it in comic books. Make it a joke, so no one would ever believe it. But guess what? There's one more piece to this story. One last breadcrumb. In 2003, NASA quietly partnered with a lesser-known division of DARPA on a project called Echo Lens. No public records, just a patent application filed for a quantum resonance feedback visor capable of neurotemporal synchronization with external frequency matrices. The helmet looks almost identical to something worn by a certain DC character. You know the one. Red suit, golden boots. Time runs around him. Coincidence? Or is there something they don't want you to see? Because when fiction becomes camouflage, the truth is hiding in plain sight. They were watching nothing. A blank space. An empty chamber in CERN's SPS North area. A reinforced observation room used for low-energy beam testing. The air buzzed with electricity. Not metaphorically. Literally. The sensors picked it up first. An anomalous thermal spike. Just 0.003 degrees above baseline. Too small to set off alarms. But then the quantum field monitors began behaving strangely. They didn't spike. They flattened. Every reading, the electromagnetic interference, the residual photon scatter, even the Casimir force measurements, all collapsed to near zero. As if reality itself had stopped rippling. You're not supposed to notice when reality pauses. But this time, someone did. An intern. That's how these stories always begin. Isn't it? He was rechecking the logs manually, bored, underpaid, overqualified, and he noticed that for exactly 0.26 seconds, the detector array didn't record a particle collision. That's impossible. The beam had been fired. The data showed it entered the chamber. But no output, no scatter, no decay path, no anything. As if the particle had simply ceased to exist. It became known, informally, as Event P7. Officially, nothing. The files were locked. The experiment was marked as corrupted. But rumors leaked. They always do. Whispers about a subatomic disappearance. About an experiment that registered negative entropy. About a shadow on the internal monitor. Like someone walking in the room, except no one was there. One physicist, speaking under condition of anonymity, claimed they tried to replicate it. But every time they aimed the beam under the same conditions, low-temp vacuum, silent magnetic chamber, precise amplitude, a warning system triggered in the adjacent server room. External input detected. Let that sink in. No open ports, no remote access, no devices, but something input data into the system. And the content of that data? That part wasn't shared, not officially, but screenshots circulated. A block of code, 6 lines, in hexadecimal. When decrypted, it produced an ASCII symbol, infinity, and a single English word beneath it. Return. It gets worse. One of the researchers, Drive, Renata Holtz, allegedly suffered a breakdown 2 weeks later. According to a redacted health report that somehow surfaced on WikiLeaks, she kept repeating one phrase during intake. I watched it fold inward. It knew I saw it. I saw myself see it. What does that even mean? Another self? A mirrored observer? Or maybe, the particle didn't vanish. Maybe it was pulled, yanked into an adjacent dimension with just enough energy to breach. That's where the science ends. And the comics begin. Because if this sounds like the kind of anomaly you'd find at the root of a comic multiverse, you're not alone. Let's talk about the Flashpoint paradox. A single choice, a moment, and an entire universe changes. Events ripple outward, cities vanish, friends become enemies. But at its core, it begins with a particle moving through time. CERN's Event P7 looked eerily similar. Especially when you consider what followed. 3 months later, an unrelated quantum experiment in Sweden registered a gravitational echo at precisely the same coordinates and timestamp as event P7. Except, that lab had no beam, no particle collider, no experiment scheduled, and yet, their instruments recorded a burst of graviton-like data lasting, get this, 0.26 seconds. The exact duration of the disappearance. Some scientists believed it was crosstalk, a glitch, but one technician noticed something buried in the waveform. An audio spike. They ran it through a spectrogram. It wasn't machine noise. It was a voice. Faint, warped, but unmistakably human. And what did it say? I don't belong here. Chills yet? The lab dismissed it, scrubbed the files, but conspiracy forums exploded. Threads with titles like CERN opened a door, or Event P7 equals first traveler, populated Reddit and dark physics boards. But here's what most missed. A month after that voice transmission, a janitor at the Swedish facility found a slip of paper tucked into an unused locker. The handwriting was shaky, nervous, but it said one thing. Find Voss. He was right. There's that name again. Dr. Elliot Voss, the man whose multiverse equation was buried by NASA decades earlier. Coincidence? Or did someone, or something, cross over and remember what they were told to forget? This brings us to a mind-bending theory known as dimensional imprinting. What if every reality leaves an echo? What if certain places, certain moments, resonate with multiple timelines at once? You've probably felt it. Déjà vu. A conversation that's already happened. A face you've never seen. But know intimately. Maybe that's not your brain playing tricks. Maybe it's bleed. And if that's real, if particles can vanish across dimensions, and voices can echo through realities, then what else might be slipping through? Superman? The Justice League? Fictional. Yes, but only in our timeline. Because somewhere out there, maybe Kal-El landed in Kansas and wore a cape. And in another, he became the tyrant of a broken Earth. Or maybe none of that happened, yet. Because the timelines are still converging. Still searching for balance. Still sinking across the infinite. And just maybe, that's why you're watching this now. You've seen the symbols. The lightning bolt. The trident. The bat. They're etched into your memory not just because of movies or comics, but because they resonate somewhere deeper. What if I told you that resonance isn't random? There's a theory, buried in cognitive and neurophysics and mathematical linguistics, that suggests human brains are tuned to archetypal structures. That means we recognize patterns, symbols, and mythic personas before we consciously learn them. And that's where it gets strange. Because several scientific studies, not comic blogs, not fandom forums, but peer-reviewed journals, have demonstrated something uncanny. When people were shown symbols associated with superheroes, logos like Superman's S, or Wonder Woman's eagle, their brains lit up in precisely the same way as they do when recognizing their own national flags, or even their family names. In other words, something inside you is already wired to believe they're real. Why? One paper from MIT's Media Lab coined a term for it, iconic neuropresence. It posited that certain characters across pop culture occupy a kind of collective cognitive space, an abstract zone in which their traits become anchored in our neurology. Almost like a psychic landmark. Now let's push further. You've heard of M-theory, right? It's the scientific attempt to unify the laws of the universe, tying together the chaos of quantum mechanics and the gravity of relativity. M-theory demands 11 dimensions. Not 3, not 4, 11. It also allows for brins, membrane-like universes that float parallel to ours. If two brins collide, you get a big bang, a restart, a new timeline. Sound familiar? Because that's the same concept behind DC's Crisis on Infinite Earths. Two universes brushing together, realities collapsing, worlds being rewritten. And guess who said it first? Physicist Edward Witten, the pioneer of M-theory. But Witten's equations weren't the only thing echoing into fiction. A 2007 article in Nature Physics explored the potential of observer-based quantum influence, a fancy way of saying our perception might shape reality. Their findings? In some fringe scenarios, especially in what's called delayed choice experiments, the future can affect the past, not just in theory, but in actual lab data. So what happens when billions of minds obsess over the same fictional worlds, the same characters, the same outcomes? Do we start to imprint those realities? Is fiction a kind of dimensional feedback loop? You laugh, but think about this. Why do multiverse storylines in Marvel or DC keep converging on the same core rules? There's always a prime Earth, a nexus being, a cosmic referee like the Watcher or the Presence. Every time a universe splinters, it eventually collapses or resets, unless anchored by a powerful consciousness. That matches what actual quantum theorists suggest. Decoherence is reversible, but only if observed, which means, you watching, you reading, you imagining, you're collapsing the waveform. You're choosing a universe. And that brings us to the uncanny phenomenon of cross-universal recognition. In the late 2010s, a group of neuroscientists ran a study on dreams. Participants were asked to describe recurring dream figures, people they saw but didn't recognize. Here's what they found. A statistically anomalous percentage of subjects described a tall man with a red cape, glowing eyes, or an emblem on his chest. They never named him, but when shown a blurred rendering of Superman, they froze, said things like, "That's him," or "That's the one who kept watching me," or worse, "He told me to remember." Again, this was before they were shown any comic references. Now is that science? Or subliminal fiction? Or is it proof that some archetypes are leaking through? Let's go deeper. Entangled cognition is a hypothetical model where minds across dimensions sync up, temporarily, creating the illusion of invention when it's actually memory. That's what some researchers are now calling the superhero effect. It's the idea that we didn't create Batman, or Iron Man, or even the concept of multiversal war. We remembered it, pulled it through, coded it in stories, and eventually, built cinematic universes to make peace with what we couldn't explain. It's all so perfect, isn't it? Too perfect. The genius billionaire who built a suit of armor. The demigod banished to Earth with a hammer. The child who watched his parents die, then became fear itself. These aren't just stories. They're echoes. In fact, one Rand Corporation researcher once wrote a classified memo, later leaked, suggesting that recurring mythic figures in global media might be dimensional recurrence templates. His argument? If similar archetypes appear independently across separate timelines, they might serve as convergence points for universal stability. And the implication? Comic books might be stabilizers. A way of distributing psychological energy to keep realities anchored. That's why Superman always comes back. That's why Batman always reboots. Because in every version of reality, we need them to exist, even if only in fiction. But what happens when too many versions begin to overlap? What happens when you remember a version that never happened? Or you feel nostalgia for a scene you've never watched? What if those aren't glitches, but signals? Signals that the barrier between universes is thinning. And one day, maybe soon, we won't just read about superheroes. We'll become them, or their enemies. It started as a joke. A single line buried deep in a declassified 1987 Department of Defense memo. Increased risk of memetic intrusion from non-real entities. Monitor containment protocols for fictional recurrence. At first glance, it looked like a typo. A clerical error. Non-real entities? What does that even mean? But then more lines surfaced. A thread began to form. Another memo, dated 3 months later, referenced cross-dimensional stimuli leaking through entertainment mediums. A handwritten note in the margin. Barely legible. Read. They're writing it before it happens. You don't find that in most government paperwork. Unless, of course, you're not supposed to. These weren't comic book nerds theorizing from their basements. These were defense analysts, counterintelligence officers, psychological warfare operatives. And they were afraid of stories. Let's back up. In 1984, a now-defunct DARPA subproject called Quanta Echo was greenlit. Its official mandate: to study the influence of recurring fictional archetypes on mass cognitive synchronization. Translation? They wanted to know why so many people, across so many demographics, responded emotionally to characters like Superman, Batman, and the Joker, even without having direct exposure to their stories. Their preliminary findings were classified, but a heavily redacted summary, leaked in 2002, includes this line. Subjects responded with elevated cortisol and theta activity when shown images of non-existent figures they claimed to remember. Let that sink in. Images of fictional characters triggered recognition in test subjects. Recognition that shouldn't have been possible. What were they seeing? Or rather, what were they remembering? One theory, quietly passed around black budget meetings, proposed the existence of cognitive phantoms, entities that exist in conceptual space, but gain mass through human belief. You've heard this before. Tulpa theory. The idea that a being can emerge into our reality if enough people believe in it. Imagine that, but scaled up across the entire media landscape. Now consider this. In 1985, just 1 year into Quanta Echo, the Defense Intelligence Agency flagged a children's television script, not for violence, not for subversion, but because the villain in the episode bore a 99% likeness, visually and behaviorally, to a composite sketch from a military-grade simulation run 6 years earlier. That simulation? An exercise designed to predict potential threats from unknown sources in case of sudden interdimensional exposure. The villain's name in the cartoon? The Collector. The same code name used in the simulation. Coincidence? The memo didn't think so. It called it spontaneous mimetic recursion. A mouthful. But it means this. The fiction we create may be reflections of structures already embedded in the multiversal substrate. In other words, we're not making things up. We're tuning in. Some operatives pushed for a crackdown on speculative fiction. You can find their memos, still redacted, with titles like The Superman Problem, Nexus Beings and the American Public, Mimetic Resonance in Serialized Media, Risk Assessment. One chilling memo from 1991 includes this phrase: containment breach risk elevated due to predictive accuracy of fictional content. Containment? Breaches? Predictive accuracy? This wasn't about movies. This wasn't about comics. This was about control. Because the deeper they looked, the more fiction seemed to match events that hadn't happened yet. One analyst cited Watchmen, which predicted global nuclear anxiety and surveillance states years before they fully materialized. Another flagged an obscure 1970s DC comic issue in which the villain releases a virus designed to reduce global population via a faked vaccine rollout. It was too close, too detailed, and worst of all, too specific to ignore. The conclusion? Either comic book writers were psychic, or someone, or something, was feeding them ideas. There's a memo that was never supposed to be seen, written in longhand by a civilian contractor named Jay Weller. Weller's job was to monitor high-volume media creators for signal intrusion. In his final report, dated September 18, 1988, he wrote, "I dreamt of a red sky swallowing the earth, a tower that hummed like a tuning fork, and a man, glowing gold, who told me to remember. I woke up and found a new comic on my desk. I didn't write it, but it was in my handwriting." His story was dismissed. He was let go. He died 3 months later. Suicide. Officially. Unofficially? No body was recovered. Only a cape. Now you tell me, how many stories have you heard like this? Comic book creators who claim the story just came to them. Artists who draw faces they've never seen but feel haunted by. And characters who evolve without being rewritten. Take Batman. He began as a noir detective. Then he became a god. Then a multiversal nexus. Then something worse. Always adapting. Always aligning. Always reflecting something. One document, if you can believe it, suggests that Batman, or something like him, exists in other timelines, and that our comics are bleeding in just enough truth to serve as passive familiarity triggers, in case we ever meet the real thing. Why? Because sudden exposure to alternate dimensional intelligence could shatter the human mind, unless it was pre-acclimated through fictional conditioning. That's the theory. Anyway, and when asked, years later, if NASA or the DoD ever investigated it formally, one anonymous official replied, "If we did, it would be in the stories you've already read." They never aired the full recording. Not because of technical issues, but because of what he said, and who responded. The year was 1976. The Apollo program had officially ended, but classified missions continued under the codename Project Ophiuchus. These weren't missions of exploration. They were for observation, orbit-to-ground surveillance, anomalous signal tracking, unacknowledged celestial events. Commander James Harrow was one of the last men sent to the moon. Official records state his module malfunctioned shortly after lunar descent. The mission was aborted. No footage was retrieved. That's the official story. But declassified transcripts, obtained in fragments via the 2014 FOIA leaks, tell something far more disturbing. Harrow was alone in the lander. He activated a backup microphone, presumably not aware it was still connected to Houston's passive telemetry. And he began speaking, not to Earth, but to himself. "Everything's too quiet. The stars aren't where they should be." Then, after several minutes of silence, "Something's looking at me." No one in mission control responded. They thought he was hallucinating. Lunar isolation can do that. But then the second voice came through. Not over radio. Inside the module. The recording captured a low-frequency murmur. Garbled, but unmistakably human. And it said, "You've been here before." Harrow's breathing spiked. His vitals surged. He whispered, Who are you?" The voice again, "I am you. But you made a different choice." NASA scrubbed the logs, archived the audio under experimental code entries. But one sound engineer kept a copy, on reel-to-reel tape. He held onto it for decades. Obsessively. Quietly. Until he passed away in 2009. His daughter found the tape labeled, "Echo Harrow, do not play." She played it anyway. The voice, the second one, matched her father's. Not Harrow's. Her father's. Except, he had never been to space. That's when rumors of dimensional phase reflection began circulating among fringe scientists. The idea that under perfect quantum conditions, extreme distance, minimal interference, and neural openness, a person might resonate with alternate selves across multiversal brains. And the moon, it seems, was one of those places. No electromagnetic noise, no atmospheric drag, just pure silence. And in that silence, Harrow heard himself. Another version. A failed version. Because here's the twist. Later psych evaluations, classified, of course, revealed that Harrow had never applied to the astronaut program. Not our Harrow. The one listed in NASA's personnel files had a completely different photo. Different handwriting. Different biometric markers. So who was in that module? Some believe it was an echo. A version from a timeline where the Apollo program never ended. And somehow, he slipped through. NASA never spoke publicly about Project Ophiuchus. But some internal memos hint at a cover-up. Not to protect technology or foreign secrets, but to hide evidence of dimensional overlap. One even reads, "The astronauts' memories include events from missions that haven't occurred. Recommend indefinite isolation and memory containment protocols." They couldn't let him return home. Because he didn't come from it. And there's more. In 1998, during a private symposium of aerospace engineers and cognitive theorists, a whistleblower presented something astonishing. A set of dream journals. Allegedly written by Harrow during isolation. Each entry ended the same way. I'm not supposed to exist here. I left someone behind. He's still up there. Now ask yourself, why would NASA bury this? What was so dangerous about a man talking to himself? Unless, of course, he wasn't. One more thing. A satellite image leaked in 2011, taken by China's Chang'e 2 orbiter, shows a faint structure near the southern pole of the moon. Too angular to be natural. Too faded to identify. But when run through contrast filters, it resembles a lander. An Apollo-era model. One that shouldn't be there. Because the Harrow mission, officially, never happened. And yet, there it sits. Abandoned. Silent. But if you listen closely, some say the frequency it broadcasts on carries a whisper. Not a message. A name. James. 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 Over. And over. And over. So who, or what, is still transmitting? You thought this was just a video. A harmless documentary on conspiracies and comics. Something to entertain you, maybe spook you a little, then let you get back to your life. But now you're here, still watching, still listening, and something feels off, doesn't it? That's because you've felt this before. Not this exact video, not this moment, but the echo of it. A strange pull. A sense that something's watching you while you're watching this. You don't have the words for it. But there's a reason. Because you're not the only you watching this. Right now. On another Earth. In another version of your timeline. You clicked this video 3 minutes earlier. Or later. Or not at all. Or maybe you're the version who made the video. And somewhere else, there's a you who never found this channel. A you who still believes this is all fiction. Comfortable, safe, but not this, you. No, you are the one who made it far enough to hear this. Which means you've already changed. There's a theory that gained traction in closed circles of consciousness researchers called observer recursion. It suggests that once an individual becomes aware of multiversal entanglement, truly aware, their timeline becomes liquid. You begin to jump, not physically, not visibly, but cognitively. Choices that once seemed random begin to echo. Songs feel different, faces unfamiliar. You reach for a mug you've never owned. You say things you don't remember learning. Because maybe you didn't, but another version of you did. You are not a solid object moving through time. You are a signal, modulating through overlapping frames of infinite possibility. And sometimes, just sometimes, those frames misalign. What you call glitches, déjà vu, missing socks, lost time. They're not accidents. They're packet loss. And lately, the losses are increasing. There's a study, buried deep in Stanford's Department of Theoretical Neurology, that tracked cognitive recursive overlap among test subjects exposed to parallel identity triggers. You know what they used? Superheroes. They showed people images of multiple versions of the same character, Flash in red, Flash in white, Flash with blue lightning, and asked participants to pick the real one. The result? Disassociation. Test subjects reported feeling split. Some even blacked out. One man swore he had been that version of the character on a different Earth. He described the suit, the world, the death of his own family. He was later institutionalized. But the tape of his interview, if you know where to look, is still out there. He ends it by whispering, "I'm not supposed to be in this version. Let me ask you something. Have you ever stared in the mirror and paused? Not because you looked strange, but because something felt off. Like the person staring back wasn't entirely you. That's not madness. That's resonance. Because here's what no one told you. The more you observe the multiverse, the more it observes you back. Every thought, every click, every belief, narrows your wave function. Solidifies one version, destroys the rest. So maybe you're the real you. Or maybe you're just the one who won the observation race. Either way, the others aren't gone. They're watching too. Right now. Behind the glass of your screen. In the flicker of reflection. In the lag when you scrolled to this exact moment. They remember different things. They know different truths. And one of them, one version of you, has already seen the end. The moment when fiction bleeds into fact. When comic book multiverses stop being entertainment and become leakage points, controlled vents for unstable truths. Think about it. What if Superman was real? But not here. What if the idea was seeded to prepare us? What if the stories are breadcrumbs? And what if you, yes, you, are a seed too? Because now that you've watched this far, there's no going back. You've been marked, synced, pulled closer to the convergence point. Don't believe me? Look around. Is everything exactly where it was when you started watching? Or did something shift? You'll notice soon, if you haven't already. Maybe a word that sounds wrong. A familiar smell that shouldn't be there. A notification that blinks twice. Not once. It's beginning. And you're not alone anymore. He's watching you. The other you. And he remembers what you forgot.